for today, we will be going over, do some introductions about USPK, and we're going to go over a quick progress report. We're going to talk about our spot athlete individual insurance, and then the meat and potatoes for today is our Olympics discussion. We will have opportunity for questions at the end. You might notice that you are all muted and not able to unmute yourself. We will be able to do that at the end, just so we can get through all the discussion points. Of course, you're totally welcome to use the chat. In theory, I made a Q&A option as well in the Zoom settings, so feel free to use that if you can find it. Otherwise, drop your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat. And without further ado, let's jump on in. So just a quick refresher, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, which means our guiding star, our mission is to advance the growth and development of parkour in the United States through advocacy, education, community, and governance. Nonprofits are required to be held to standards of transparency above private organizations. They're also responsible. They are also required to have a board of directors. Unlike a for-profit board of directors, all members of a nonprofit board of directors are volunteer. The idea being that the board of directors are the representatives of the community that the nonprofit is accountable to. So everybody on our board of directors does parkour. These are all of our wonderful people who put in many, many hours of volunteer work that are really appreciated. And I also do briefly just want to highlight our new board treasurer, Danny. We're really excited to have you on the team. She's here. Feel free to throw some emojis in the chat for her. But she has a great background. She owned Infinite Movement Academy in 2017 to 2021. She also has extensive experience in event leadership, working with World Chase Tag and the Pan American Championship. So shout out to Danny. Thanks so much for joining the team. Hello. Yeah. And then some quick updates of what's happening in 2025. So some quick things. We have begun to offer fiscal sponsorship, which is where a nonprofit can extend its 501c3 status over a project such that they can do things like collect donations that are tax deductible, apply for grants, and a variety of other things, and utilize us for the back end bookkeeping. So really excited. This year, we started working with the women's parkour movement, Obsidian Gathering, Art of Retreat we worked with for a couple of years as well. So thank you so much for everybody who's attended the women's movement that just happened. And Obsidian Gathering is coming up on the weekend of Juneteenth. And Art of Retreat should be early fall, specifics to follow on that one. What else are we up to? We are continuing to work on developing our general liability insurance for our business members. We're not going to be focusing on that one today, but it is still in the works and moving forward, and we're hoping to have some further announcements maybe mid-year around that one. And then two other shout outs. We are now working on building a network of college parkour clubs. We do have shout out to Rowan as our first university. And if anybody does have a existing parkour student club that you'd like to be a part of this network, or if you know a student, if you are a college student who's interested in starting one and getting resources on how to start a parkour college club, let us know. Feel free to email us at collegeclubs@uspk.org. And then my other highlight is a save the date. April 19th is going to be a coaching conference, a virtual coaching conference that is part of our virtual business conference series. This one is highlighted on specifically the topic of coaching. Later this year, we will have one specific to community, and then the other one specific to gyms. So April 19th is going to be for coaching. It is free for USPK members, and it's going to be $30 for non-members. So that's going to be cool. We'll come down the pipeline. And I will turn it over to Mel to talk about our current 2025 youth and adult competition circuit.
Hey everybody, I know a lot of you, but I'm the National Competition Director for USPK. So throughout the season, I help organize our amazing regional coordinators. You can see our 6 regions there, and we have 1 or 2 regional coordinators in each region. The preference would be to have 2 in each region. So if you find yourself wanting to help out in the future, hit me up and we'll get you connected. We have 29 local qualifiers scheduled throughout the country. We are really excited. This is our first year to have a full representation from all the regions running qualifier events and regional championships. So each region will be having their regional championship leading to a national championship. For adults, it's going to be the same format we've had the 2 previous years. We will be announcing the gym and location soon for our national championship. And as with our 2 previous years, the top third or 3 athletes, depending on the smaller number, will be qualified to go on to SPL. And we had a number of athletes from our league do really well in SPL last year, and we're looking forward to seeing them continue at SPL this year. They will be coming in to help with the national championship again, and we're really excited to be working with them. New this year that we are so excited about is we're having the USPK Championship Week for our youth and teen athletes hosted at Woodward out in California. So any youth who qualifies for their regional championship is qualified for that week where they will get competition specific coaching and get to know each other, because a huge part of what we want to do for that youth is connect them with other youth who are passionate about parkour around the country and make them feel like they're part of the broader national community. So we are really excited about that partnership. And again, we pride ourselves in working with gyms and other parkour run businesses and are excited to continue to do that. These are our regional coordinators for the season. They have been working so hard this year to reach out to the parkour gyms across the country and create a circuit of competitions to get everyone having opportunities to compete this year. So huge thank you to all of them. This year we added in every other week meetings, and they're just doing a lion's share of work right now. So can't thank them enough.
All right, for the next part of the discussion, we are going to be collecting some votes from USPK members. These are non-binding votes, which mean that we are trying to collect your thoughts on the following discussion topics. So just a quick reminder that if you're not already a USPK member, you can go to uspk.org/join. I will also drop that in the chat real fast. Um, and yeah, so go ahead and do that if you aren't already. The votes are going to be sent out later this evening, so you have a little bit of wiggle room today if you aren't able to jump on right now and become a member. So just by the end of today, that's when we're going to be sending out the votes. They will be via email, so make sure to check your email. They will be 2 separate emails, one for each question that we're going to be asking. And we'll be looking at the results on Monday, so you will be able to vote over the weekend. So our first discussion is talking about our current offering. As many of you know, we have been offering since 2022 individual athlete insurance. So basically what that means is you, as a USPK member, if you have signed up for this, you'd get, if you get injured anywhere in the world doing parkour, you get covered for that, and you can submit to to have that paid for. So this works for if you are somebody who does not have insurance. As we all know, insurance in this country is insane. Or if you're someone who does have insurance, this can still cover your deductibles as well. So it's useful for both options if you do or don't have insurance. The big update that we're checking in on is while it was established in 2022, we have had over 120 athletes covered, and then over 400 participants in events covered through this. We've also had 5 claims paid for athletes. So that's been a question of like, does this actually work? The answer is absolutely yes. The thing that has changed this year is that our partnership is ending with Spot, which is our underwriter for this Spot athlete insurance. They did work with USA Climbing and ski resorts and a variety of other sports, but they're actually restructuring. It is no fault of our own. Their venture capital funding is drying up, and they're moving on to something else. I think it's something like travel protection insurance. So our partnership with them does end May 25th. But if you have not signed up now, if you're not signed up yet and still want this, you do still get 1 full year of coverage. So even if you sign up May 24th, the day before our partnership ends, you're still going to get that coverage for a full year. Right now, which is a change from last year, all of our members automatically signed up for Spot. This year, because we wanted to make sure that there was a more essentially cheaper membership option. You can either pay for just the $30 membership without Spot, or you can get the $60 or $90 add-on if you want that. There's some differences in coverage of what levels of you know payout you can get for each one, but that is on our website at uspk.org/join. We are looking right now at seeking a new underwriter. I am talking with a couple brokers about it. So there are some options, but the vote that we want to check in on is how important is this offering to you? Is it important to you that we continue to provide this to our members? So that is vote number 1 that'll be going out tonight via email. And then the second vote is going to be, should parkour be in the Olympics? So on that big discussion, I'm gonna turn it over to Kozy and Mel to talk more about some things about that, what that could
Thank
entail.
you. So to start with, I'm Mel McQueen, and in addition to being a board member at USPK and the national coordinator, I was recently elected to the Parkour Earth Board and have been one of the founding members of their competition committee, which is working to, well, I'll get more into what they're doing later, but I also, before coming to USPK, was a regional coordinator with USA Climbing and was with USA Climbing during the entry into the Olympics and got to see it through that side of climbing going into the Olympics. And so I have been deep in on seeing what's happening with parkour and have been involved in seeing it happen with climbing. And then I'll throw it over to Kozy.
Yeah, and my name is Adam Kozy. For those of you that don't know me, been doing parkour since 2010-ish. Moved to DC after completing the FBI Academy and starting with APK out there. I will never be probably remembered for my movement. I'm fairly average across all categories, but I still love this sport and want to see it grow and succeed. What I do have are a very particular set of skills that make me a nightmare for people like gymnastics. And that's where I've tried to like lend my expertise as best as possible when helping USPK pick strategic directions, figuring out how kind of the sports industry and the politics work there. And combined with Mel's knowledge from USA Climbing and from talking to a whole bunch of different heads of sport from other various US national governing bodies, or NGBs, we've kind of put together a patchwork of like what the landscape looks like for parkour and whether we truly want to actually pursue Olympic recognition, because there's some heavy pros and there's definitely some heavy cons. So you can kind of see the outline of like what we're going to talk about here. We left FIG and gymnastics off there, but trust me, we'll get to them. Don't worry about that. So a bit about Olympic recognition. It's politics. It's a lot of politics. For those of you that kind of need like an overview of like how the system works, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, is at the top. They basically decide what's on the Olympic program for winter, summer, Paralympics, etc. They delegate funding to it. The IOC oversees the IFs, which are international federations, FIG being an example of those, which govern Olympic sports across international borders, making sure that there's kind of like fairness, the same standards across different nations, and kind of doing a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to like keeping this patchwork of sports and making sure that things are fair. They also oversee that they work closely with other international governing bodies, such as WADA, which oversees doping, to make sure that people aren't using performance enhancing drugs. I think a lot of folks have probably seen that over the years. There was a giant scandal in 2016. And actually, that was related to my other day job with cybersecurity, where it was uncovered that there was a lot of Russian hacking after kind of an investigation into Russia's doping allegations. So yeah, that was a super interesting time in my life where my worlds were definitely overlapping. But yes, from there, those international orgs and IFs then basically work closely with national Olympic committees. Ours in the US is called the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, or USOPC. And that body is charged with governing national governing bodies, or NGBs. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of that national structure in a second. I think the big thing is to zoom out and say, well, how would we even get to the Olympics, right? Previously, there was a entity called GISIF, which existed, and this was kind of like, I think of it as like an entry level international org where new sports, action sports specifically, or kind of what people would regard maybe as more fringe sports, could essentially, like, their governing bodies could join this entity to kind of get mentorship and start to learn how to grow as a sport, what's needed to be admitted into the Olympics. It was pairing them with a lot of folks from other international federations, and kind of, for a while, it seemed to be like the room where it happens. However, in November of 2022, the members of that entity decided to dissolve it. And this was essentially written up as kind of like, it was basically a power grab by the IOC. Essentially, they kind of didn't like the control getting away from the IOC, and that handing kind of outsized power to newer orgs or federations that were kind of helping the new orgs grow. And so they basically made it so that this entity doesn't really exist, which means that now, post 2022, for a new sport to really gain entry into the Olympics, it needs an existing international federation as a sponsor. I think an easy way is to just show an example. So USA Skateboarding, which is the NGB at the national level for skateboarding in the US, reports to the International Federation of Roller Sports. So roller sports encompasses more than just skateboarding, but was an older federation that existed many years before. So they essentially joined up with that international federation, and they kind of like basically get their guidelines, whatever they're setting up for their competitions. All of those things come from Roller Sports Federation. And skateboarding was an interesting one because it had this massive popularity in the 90s, with Tony Hawk's generation, coming up with the X Games coming out in 92 or 94. And then Tony Hawk's Pro Skater video game. Shout out, can't wait to see Store's version of that soon, hopefully. But yeah, basically a wave of popularity. And then you had some really key business folks like Tony Hawk basically setting aside a national governing body for skateboarding and then kind of not touching it for about 10 to 15 years, which was part of the reason that another sport wasn't really able to come in and kind of take them over. Was it did exist, but they weren't doing anything with it, which I think parkour would have loved the opportunity to have an incubation period where we weren't necessarily cradle robbed by a different older federation. But that is not what happened. So obviously, as most of you know, in 2016, FIG declared basically parkour to be a part of FIG, a subdiscipline of gymnastics. And there wasn't really anyone to tell them no. And this, unfortunately, is not the first time that this has happened. If you're familiar with the previous Parkour Earth CEO, Damien Puddle, he has a doctorate and has done some amazing studies on, IOC's kind of corruption, I don't know, encroachment of action sports and how this has happened across many different sports at this point. So look up Dr. Damien Puddle and parkour and on Google, and there's chat GPT. There's a whole bunch of like articles where he talks specifically about how this has happened to other sports and what some of the outcomes were with each of those. The main thing that we should probably discuss, obviously, besides FIG's encroachment, is even last night there was basically a vote for the new IOC president. Fortunately, I think for us, Watanabe, who was previously the head of FIG and still is, was one of the 7 candidates to be the new president. He did not get picked for it. He wasn't close necessarily. But instead, they actually elected the first woman president of the IOC last night, which is really cool. And it still kind of remains to be seen what the manifesto looks a little bland, I would say, as far as like when it comes to action sports and what the Olympics actually wants to do with them. So I would say that the jury's still out on where parkour kind of falls into that. The Olympics is big money, right? This is one of the most watched and televised events in the world. Already for the 2025 to 2028 season, they've raked in about 7.5 billion in revenue, and we're not even like into it yet. So that's pretty crazy. That's pretty much what they raked in for the previous Olympic period. Anytime money is involved, of course, there's the potential for corruption. This is extended to heads of state, like actual presidents, prime ministers have been caught up in scandals over the years with trying to curry favor to get the Olympics in their country. A lot of money exchanging hands via back doors. Host cities have had their own kind of issues with the Olympics. It's always promised to bring in a whole bunch more tourism and infrastructure, and sometimes it does. But sometimes it also leaves the host city basically putting up a whole bunch of facades or kicking people out of their family homes in order to like make room for a new stadium. There's a host of issues that kind of come with that. And of course, some of the doping stuff that we talked about earlier. One of the important things I think to point out, because I think a lot of people in parkour kind of still look at other sports and go, well, hey, I'm a pro athlete. Where the hell's my Gatorade sponsorship? Why am I not getting $1 million contracts? And the answer is because we haven't earned it yet. We haven't really gotten to that space. It takes a long time to get those types of high level sponsors in the door. And while we're working on that, and I'll talk about some of those efforts in a bit, it does take an extremely long time, and you have to show a lot of value add, which is just obviously eyes on a product for something to be able to be sponsored at the millions and billions level that we're talking about. And it hasn't happened yet for parkour. So to this end, though, what's interesting, I think, especially in the US, is that the Olympic athletes are not necessarily paid to be athletes. 58% of Olympians reported for the Paris Olympics, ahead of the Paris Olympics in 2024, that they were financially unstable. Famously, like we've had some Olympians and their parents basically declare bankruptcy. Gabby Douglas from gymnastics had to basically declare bankruptcy because the training was so intense and required so much money and time and energy. The majority of Olympians hold 2 to 3 part-time jobs. That includes everything from fry cooks, waiters, etc. in the service industry, retail, and yes, even OnlyFans. There was a great Forbes article that I'm happy to link anyone who wants it, talking about the Olympians that were running OnlyFans and making social media basically their full-time job in order to try and pull down sponsorships to keep going in the sport that they love. The other super interesting fact that I don't think a lot of people are aware of is that if you win first place, if you win gold uh, in the US, you are only getting $37,500 for that. So that's not even necessarily like big money. I think your gold medal is worth potentially that or more, but who really wants to like sell their gold medal after they've earned it just to like support their living? So yeah, not ideal. And it goes down from there. And the last note is just like I thought it was so interesting that for the 2024 Olympics, there's a lot of focus on celebrities, and specifically how many of them showed up to the Olympics, that you could tell that there was a big marketing push probably to get a lot of those folks in the door and highlight them. But I think the sad side of that is you had some folks like Flavor Flav who actually stepped up after seeing one of the Olympians complain on X or Twitter about basically like a week away from competing in water polo and not being able to afford their own rent, and stepping up and saying, "I got you. Let me cover rent." And of course, the media made it into this like big hero story rather than really talking about the reality, which is like that's pretty shameful that we're coming from such a developed nation like the US, and basically people aren't able to even like get um, their rent or daily living expenses covered by any of this stuff. So I'm going to kick it over to Mel, who's going to talk a little bit about Parkour Earth and kind of some of the efforts there.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So Parkour Earth was originally, I'm sure, actually looking at most people on here, you know the history of Parkour Earth, but it was created to be a viable option for an international governing body for parkour. And for a long time had sort of a anti-competition stance, and has recently decided to come in and try to pull together in the competition sphere. So there are 3 countries who have national governing bodies that have been running national circuits. So we've got the Czech Republic and US and Switzerland have been running competitions. And so we're all working together with a bunch of other people from Parkour UK and across the world to come up with guidelines. Our first step is to come up with guidelines to help countries who have not been able to pull together a national governing body or start running competitions with resources to help them do that, and then are looking to hopefully have international competition in 2026. So we have begun work on that, and if you're interested in more about what we're doing there, being a part of that, you're always welcome to message me after this. It is exciting to see Parkour Earth stepping up into competition. One of the most immediate outcomes of that is that Swiss Parkour is filing with the Swiss Olympic Committee to be recognized as the official national governing body for parkour in Switzerland. And as a part of that, they have to show that they are a part of the international governing body, and they are able to do that because of Parkour Earth. So it would be exciting. Hopefully they will be able to get that and be able to be recognized as the governing body for parkour in Switzerland. So we're doing everything we can at Parkour Earth to help them with that. I just want to say big picture, if you look at like rock climbing, which is the one I know the best, and skateboarding, money didn't come into those sports because of the Olympics, and it's not what built their popularity. They were both allowed, like most other sports that are in the Olympics, a lot of time to develop on their own and build up their followings, create their structure, and get running. So USA Climbing and the International Sport Climbing Federation had been running national and international climbing competitions for decades when they finally made it into the Olympics. It had been developed within those federations by the climbers so that they could come up with their own structures. And one of the key things for that is that they were having the events in climbing gyms. They were supporting climbing gyms that were run by climbers. And it helped develop the entire climbing businesses and communities. And climbing was able to maintain that most of the people who climb plastic are also outdoor rock climbers, and it kept that connection. The vast majority of climbers don't have anything to do with competition, whether they go to a gym or outdoors. Parkour will continue to be like that. Most people who do parkour probably will not be involved in competition, and that's great. That's a huge part. That's the soul of what parkour is. But looking at competition for the people who really want it and need it, and I think most of you know my daughter's a competitor. I have two kids, one competed in climbing, one competed in parkour. And the group of friends and community of support and drive and focus to compete has helped them immeasurably in their lives. That had nothing to do with wanting to go to the Olympics or the Olympics. We were actually invited to I was invited to go to a training that the Pan American Gymnastics Union held for parkour coaches. It was attended entirely by gymnastics gyms who would like to have parkour programs. And it was 2 days trying to teach gymnastics coaches how to teach parkour. And that's what the FIG and gymnastics is trying to do for parkour. They're not putting money into parkour gyms. They're not putting money into parkour athletes. They're putting money into gymnastics to help it take parkour. And I also real quick wanted to talk about what we saw with climbing is what we would see with parkour, that they aren't talking about freeing up multiple medals for parkour. It would be one medal, and we would probably be faced with a situation like climbing was, where it would be a combined event, and our athletes would have to do multidisciplinary, probably competing in skill, speed, and style, all three events, and then a combined score of your performance in all three events. And so in addition to the changes we've already seen in parkour competition for FIG, the straight there and back courses, things like that, that is another thing we would probably see. Although they only do 2 events in FIG, they don't do skill events. So I think that's all I have for this slide.
Cool. Thank you, Mel. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the big thing is like, again, we're saying this from a standpoint of we understand that parkour is one of these sports, very much like climbing, very much like surfing. The vast majority of people are going to continue to do the sport out on their own and maybe not give a crap about what we're doing. But what we are really trying to do is represent that very like professional side of parkour in the sports industry because it's extremely cutthroat and political, to basically continue advocating for the sport and saying like, hey, no, like we do have like a series of values, we have a culture, we have history, and we have things that like training outdoors, which it's so interesting that their system is basically talking about trying to do training indoors in cushy gymnastics gyms, but then their actual competition is outdoors on hard surfaces. So I think that would be a pretty big jump for anyone who's trained in a gymnastics gym their entire life. But yeah, that's kind of what they're setting up at this point.
I would add in that at that coaching session, and I had a great time and met great people at that training session for the gymnastics coaches. And I thought it was great that they invited me to be a part of it. One of the discussions I had with the gymnastics coaches was that, really within a parkour gym, as we're training students, we generally have the expectation that they are going to take the skills that they are learning from us and transition it into outside, because I think all of us would agree that one of the biggest parts of parkour is going out and identifying a challenge on your own. It's that mental process of taking something you've learned in the gym and finding a place where you can apply it outside, or just starting outside and building up skills outside. And when I was telling them, that the things we do to encourage our students to go outside, like hosting community jams and things like that, they were pretty horrified by my explaining that, and were like, yeah, I don't see us ever doing that piece. So um, that's that's one of my concerns, is that missing understanding of the cultural piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah, big yikes from me on that one. But yeah, that's thanks for sharing, Mel. The we'll hop into the second bullet point, which is that going down to the national level, right? Unlike most countries, and I point this out about the US when especially talking to our partners via Parkour Earth in different countries, as well as just like I've lived overseas a long period of my like adult life, going in and out of the US and regularly living in Europe, Australia, pretty much every continent at this point, meeting the parkour communities there, hearing how they kind of function. One thing that always struck me was just we don't have a Ministry of Sports in the U.S. They pretty much determined that like it should be kind of held by like private interests, and that the only kind of like government funding and designated entity is really the USOPC. They are the ones who get to designate national governing bodies. There are a ton of national governing bodies that exist outside of the USOPC. You can still call yourself a national governing body. One of those requirements usually is to be a 501c3 nonprofit. But there's plenty of sports that either don't want to pursue Olympic recognition that are still considered NGBs. The big thing is that the USOPC provides a lot of funding, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So USA Gymnastics is currently the current USOPC recognized NGB for parkour. Who is the athlete representative for parkour? It's Alex Rankert. That's his Insta. He's a trampoline gymnast. And if you go on his Insta, you will see a whole bunch of trampoline and zero parkour. So, if you go to the USAG site, parkour is listed as a subdiscipline with a whole bunch of information about parkour, the competitions that they've had, very little about the culture, very little about how parkour started, or really much attachment to the community other than highlighting the athletes, which a lot of the athletes bridge, I would say, multiple worlds where they've competed in nationals, they've also competed in SPL, they're going to a lot of the different competitions, so they're people that should be familiar to most of us, I think. The parkour experts that are weighing in on the submission process, like as of today, I think they'll be announcing basically who they're selecting for Parkour Gymnastics Team USA, are Justin Schaefer and Will Davison. I've had a chat with Justin Schaefer before, who seems to be, I would say 2 years ago, he seemed very reluctant to be in the role and was looking to get out, but it's been 2 years. I'm not sure exactly why he's in the role, if he's kind of not feeling great about the ethics of it. But yeah, you can also see at the link there. I can always post that in the chat. But the athletes that have competed, I think it's important to point out that like it's not our role to tell these athletes, hey, don't work with Fig, don't do these things. It's your life, it's your career, and if you want to pursue this for money and be professional, and you think that this is the best way to do it, that's completely within your prerogative. But I do think it's important to highlight the people that are doing it, and that's pretty much on the USAG site. You can reach out to those folks if you kind of have qualms about it, I think the best thing to do is to talk to people and kind of say like, hey, I have concerns about this. What is your insight into this? And I think you'll learn a lot from talking to these athletes. Some are very much, uh, kind of, I think in the beginning, there were a lot of athletes that were like, I want to change this from the inside. And we have one of those athletes with us to talk about that today. We also have some folks that are kind of very much like open about the fact that they're just like, yeah, it may be a little selfish, but this is kind of what am this is I think going to be the best thing for my career. I get a lot of exposure, and I get maybe a couple things paid for, and I get to be a part of Team USA. But I would argue, next slide. I would argue that those athletes are selling out the sport maybe for an extremely low price, and that uh, this is my personal opinion, is that self-respect and self-dignity requires the ability to kind of say, hey, I'm worth more, my sport is worth more. So let's talk about USA Gymnastics. The big thing is that they've had a bit of a spotty track record here in the US specifically. For those of you that haven't watched the Netflix documentary Athlete A, it's still up. It's an amazing documentary. It talks about the 500 plus sexual assault allegations that USAG faced in 2018. The allegations and the payouts to those victims of that, caused them to have bankruptcy. The USOPC actually started a process to decertify them as the national governing body for gymnastics, let alone like parkour. Like they basically almost got kicked out of their own sport, and for reasons unknown, were quickly recertified. They went through 4 different CEOs in the span of really a few months, like less than a year. Their newest CEO is Lili Lung. She comes as a former VP from the NBA, so she knows her stuff, definitely. She knows how to handle a crisis, and came into the org at a very tumultuous time. 2021 was when they actually finally admitted to the scandals that had been underway, and the FBI got involved. That is the reason that we have USA Safe Sport nowadays, which basically manages and works in concert with pretty much every national governing body and sports organization to prevent sexual abuse and abuse of minors across sports. So that's something that like USPK is very committed to, as well as trying to make sure that we are safe sport compliant and pushing that out to all the gyms. That's a huge piece of our efforts to kind of get general liability insurance and change the insurance industry's mind around how dangerous parkour is, so that we can get better insurance for gyms, better rates, etc. But let's talk a little bit about USAG's funding. So USAG still, as an NGB, as I mentioned, NGBs get that are recognized by the USOPC get funding every single year for running their sports. In 2023, the USOPC gave them about 4 million. 1 million of that, as you can see from the chart there, went to athletes directly. But where it goes from there, you can kind of see some of the breakouts. You can look up, I think, what some of these projects are. There's high performance sports. There's specific ones for travel, like budgets for travel, etc. When we talked to Lili about kind of where money was coming from parkour, they basically said that the only money that was really going into parkour was coming from the travel funds to basically help a couple of the athletes get out to events or provide lodging. As of right now, for the upcoming FIG events that they're running, I'm blanking on where they're at, but I'm sure we have that somewhere.
And
Montpellier is the first one, and then I think Amsterdam, somewhere in Rotterdam, maybe is like the second one. Anyways, they're gonna select 8 athletes for that, and again, I think announce it today. Those are picked via that kind of very opaque video submission process, which has those 2 parkour experts and the trampolinist weigh in on who they think is best. And basically, only 4 out of those 8 athletes get some expenses paid. They're usually responsible for their own airfare, according to their own site. and essentially get maybe some lodging, maybe some funding for food, and that's it. That's literally all of the money of, let's say, $4 million from last year. This is in addition, by the way, like USA Gymnastics is making about 27 million from memberships, insurance, the fact that basically to call yourself a gymnastics gym, you have to be a member of USAG. So I know that we push it out a lot. Hey, join USPK, for membership and stuff like that. But that is how NGBs typically make any amount of money is via memberships. And we're definitely not anywhere near as bullyish or cutthroat about forcing parkour gyms to join us or anything like that. It's very much just like we want people to be a part of us because we want you to help represent parkour and we want a united front against gymnastics. But gymnastics it's very hard to open a gymnastics gym and not be a part of USA Gymnastics. So they're making 27 million a year in addition to just getting $4 million from the USOPC. So with all of that funding, and we're going to share our financials, which are substantially less than that. In fact, for most of you paying attention, if you've actually looked, like we do have to file taxes, like our public records with the IRS as a nonprofit. Previously, a lot of those weren't public because we were under $50,000. When you are under $50,000, you file what's called a postcard, a 990. And that's what we had done because our revenue is under $50,000. So you want to compare that funding, obviously, to like what they're just getting handed for being an NGB. And then the fact that basically none of that is going to parkour. I think that's like really powerful. And so when I say that these athletes that are participating in this are potentially handing FIG a lot of clout, a lot of legitimacy, because they kind of know that basically they just need really good athletes to represent Team USA. And the more that they keep doing these competitions and getting the word out there, that's kind of how they like slowly get to take over the sport. So the athletes very much matter. We care a lot about the athletes, but again, I'm not sure it's entirely our place to tell them like, hey, don't do this. It's our job to present as many facts around this as possible and make sure that everyone's educated and informed when making these decisions. So to that effect, we also have tried to engage with USA Gymnastics. I apologize on behalf of USPK that we haven't talked about this enough. We don't want you guys to think that we're going behind anyone's backs. One of the first things that I did, I got involved in USPK 5 years ago, first as the kind of interim CEO and director. One of the first things I said was like, hey, we need to at least open up a red phone of diplomacy to USA Gymnastics. That's what you do in basic international and national relations is if you have nukes, you establish a red phone so that you can just pick that up and say, hey, maybe don't fire those right now. And it saved the world like multiple times. So that was kind of the first step, was to say, hey, we exist. We want you to have contact. We want to be able to contact you. Let's start talking about what your plans are for gymnastics. And over the years, we met with various folks. We finally did get to meet with Lily. It took, I think, months and months of scheduling to try and make that line up and be given the time of day. But we did get a meeting in. And I think there were multiple board members on the call, and we basically were pretty disappointed. It didn't seem like there was any real plan or strategic vision for where to take parkour. They basically said that they follow FIG's directives when it comes to parkour. It seemed like they very much kind of didn't really want to touch parkour, but FIG compelled them to, and they were very quick to always point out that they are a separate entity from FIG, but yet still basically follow everything that they say. They didn't disclose really how much money was going into parkour, except for the offhand mention that most of that was coming from the travel expenses, which, let's see here. Yeah, I think airfare of that like 4 million, airfare is like 92,000, but yeah, like they're still not paying for airfare for actually any of the athletes going to Montpellier or Rotterdam. Some things that USPK asked for when we had that meeting was mentorship. I think if we're going to actually consider working with USA Gymnastics, which isn't like a foregone conclusion, we said, hey, like what would be nice is if you were actually serious and you care about parkour and you want to see the sport grow, is mentorship around being a governing body, about how the Olympics work, about how funding can work, how you can bring more money into a sport, how you can, um, do fundraising, all of these different types of things, how you can start to do broadcasting, because a huge part of the Olympics revenue is broadcasting. And gymnastics has a ton of contacts when it comes to broadcasting. They work with the NCAA, they work with all of the major sports broadcasting networks to put things out. Those are big, big money contracts. And they have a lot of expertise about that. There wasn't really a great response as far as like, yeah, we can provide that. There was no nodding of heads. There was no, sure, we can work on that. We also asked for like observer status, which basically is just kind of a nice way of saying like, hey, can we join some of the world games or some of the events that you're hosting in, say, Birmingham, Alabama, and just kind of attend as, a representative of the parkour community that just wants to see what's going on, see how you're running the competitions, how you're treating the athletes. That's not necessarily saying that we have a say over what you do. We just want to be able to observe that and report back to our community. That was not really afforded to us. They were like, yeah, you can buy a ticket at the door. So I think we did send somebody local to just kind of go check it out, talk to some of the athletes, and mixed bag of reviews, it sounded like. But the point is that every interaction we've had with USAG has been polite, certainly, very diplomatic, but pretty much immediately after talking to them, they'll go, I would say, behind our backs and immediately try and poach as many top athletes as they can. A lot of them coming directly from, they seem to be going after a lot of the winners of the USAP Parkour Cup. That's USA Parkour, a different org than us, not a nonprofit, connected to Woof Poof, etc. But basically seem to be going after a lot of those athletes and directly reaching out to them to try and get them to join the FIG competitions. Again, as I've mentioned, that judging criteria seems to be rather like opaque and not have a ton of clarity around what they're looking for, what makes somebody a parkour expert, etc. And to date, we did even bring up that, hey, one solution potentially going forward, we don't like this solution. It's not our first choice. I think we would much rather have parkour be its own independent entity, just like skateboarding or climbing. But say we did work under gymnastics. What if we provided you with those top 12 athletes? Because, hey, we've actually built out a functioning national circuit that's existed and it's going into its third year now, that feeds into an international circuit, which is, run by a private league, Sport Parkour League. But we have a lot of respect for like what they do. And hey, that kind of like creates this scale and that pyramid structure that you see in so many different sporting competition throughout the sports industry. And they still haven't really taken us up on that. So despite basically having 12 or plenty more athletes to basically present them and say, hey, these folks have done the best. They've won multiple competitions. We think that they're going to represent this country the best. They're still choosing to do these kind of shady video submissions to pick their athletes.
I'll also add in real fast, Adam, that if you read through that attached PDF of their selection process, it points to what I said earlier about there only being one medal option. One of the things they discussed as they were choosing the athletes was, well, this person has freestyle, as they call it, experience, but not really speed experience. And we want athletes who we think could do well, possibly in both categories. So it's already, and having been at SPL and all these national competitions, it is a rare exception that you get one of the top freestyle athletes who is also a top speed athlete and vice versa. And so it's already pushing athletes into that. You have to have both of these skills versus being able to follow and pursue the one that you're interested.
Yeah, which definitely creates, an entirely separate category of athletes. I think, McQueen firsthand witnessed that. There were a lot of the climbing community that was really, really pissed off when they announced the Olympic inclusion because they basically made climbers who specialized in things like speed climbing and top rope or bouldering, completely separate disciplines that sure, maybe you can train multiple of those things, but if you were getting to that top level, you were specializing in probably one or the other. So, they essentially had to be a triple threat across very different categories for the first year of the Olympics. And that does get better with time. I think now climbing has been afforded 2 gold medals for this next edition.
And at the last
But it
one.
takes, and at the last one. Okay. So, but it does take time basically before you would actually have those 3 categories split out. We're looking at about a 12-year period before probably climbers feel like their sport is actually like represented in kind of the categories where you can specialize in something. So it's possible, but it does take time. So my last thing before we move on to this next slide is again, I would just reiterate that if you look at these budgets and you look at these things about, do they have money to put into parkour? Like, absolutely. Are they choosing not to? Like, yes, like blatantly. And again, even if they don't want to put in money, we've asked for things that don't require money. We've asked for mentorship, we've asked for observer status, and it's been pretty much a no every single time. So that kind of characterizes, I think, the relationship that we've had with USA Gymnastics so far. Next slide. But finally, don't take my word for it, right? Like I'm presenting as many facts as I can so that everyone's educated and informed about this stuff. But let's hear from our guest speaker, who it's for what 5 a.m. now for Danny. So thank you so much for joining us all the way from Sydney, Australia. But Danny is an amazing athlete and creator. He's been a GoPro athlete. He's been on World Chase Tag, Exathlon, Ninja Warrior, so many more. But Danny has some amazing stories when it comes to working alongside the Mexican Gymnastics Federation to advocate for parkour and learn some shocking stuff in the process. And finally, we're super excited that Danny is going to be joining us as the USPK brand partnership manager very soon. So when we talk about chasing sponsors, Danny is going to be one of the guys doing it. And we are super thankful for him volunteering his time with us in the future and especially today so early. So Danny, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Adam. So nice. So yeah, a lot of familiar faces here. Happy to be here. Yeah, it's a little bit early for me, but I'm happy to come over and share a little bit of my experience. Yeah, I guess like a little bit to add for it. I've been training parkour for 18 years now. It's been a wild ride. I've seen the evolution of the sport. I've always been trying to be involved in the development of the sport in one way or another. And that led me into getting involved with FIG. Um, I guess I'm just kind of the person where I'm like, I can hear people's opinions, but I need to make my own. I need to go explore, talk to people, meet them, work with them, see what their mind is thinking, what their agenda is, and that way, like, strive for like a good direction for the sport. I've been I've been lucky and fortunate enough to be working with big brands, big TV shows, big companies, and along those, FIG came along as well. And today, I guess I just want to share a little bit of my experience, what it was working with FIG, and how they manage things from the inside. Um, Definitely, what Adam was saying is that there's definitely a budget. There's definitely a big budget in gymnastics. They could invest in parkour if they wanted to, but the problem is that because gymnastics has so many ramifications and different like areas of the sport, it means that if they give money to parkour, they have to take money from another division. And because they've been these divisions for the longest time, of course, now no one wants to lose their budget, right? Like trampoline doesn't want to lose their budget, like beams doesn't want to lose their budget, et cetera, et cetera. So it's it was really hard to see that from the inside. I met Charles, the president. Obviously Yamakasi. We like if you've did parkour, you know, Charles like was one of the founders. I was really honored to work with him and to get to see his vision. Unfortunately, I believe that the problem lies with the team and the people that he hired to work with him. Um, as I said, like I tried to, I call it infiltrate the fig, and try to understand what was going on. Um, because obviously it's our sport. We've built it, right? We've like literally built this whole sport. A lot of us, including a lot of people in here in this chat, have built this sport from the ground up. And obviously, coming like having some other alien organization take over, and not look into the best interests of our athletes, of our sport, of our gyms, our economics, right? It's hard to see. And unfortunately, I guess at some point David Bell thought it was a great idea to sell this to Watanabe. And they actually thought it was the right move. However, knowing the technicalities of it, knowing how close-minded gymnastic is, and how they're not willing to change their ways, and they have a lot of standards and controls over how they score, how they build obstacle courses, how they go about courses for coaches and athletes, etc., etc. It led me to believe that they were rushing the whole process to get as much people as possible fast, like we were talking about, like getting people registered for for the sport, for the division of parkour in gymnastics, so they can show the IOC and all these other organizations and sponsors that they had enough numbers to back up like parkour was part of gymnastics. I was also unfortunate enough to be chosen as the first official national committee of parkour representatives in Mexico with gymnastics, the Mexican Gymnastics Federation. So I also got to see from my side, of my country, what the deal was. And unfortunately, and I might get in trouble, but it's a mafia. It's definitely a mafia. It's definitely interest in there. They're using parkour for their gains to get funding, to get permits, to get new customers in the door, to sell new products to gymnastic halls that are failing, right? And then that you would think it would expand parkour, but in fact it dilutes it because the fact is they're not teaching parkour. They're teaching gymnastics, and it's quite different things. And the problem is that they are that set that a front flip done in mats, it's the same as a front flip done in concrete, and it's not the same thing. It's like I tell them like this analogy in Switzerland when I was in a meeting. I was like, well, if that's the case, like, well, isn't like a backflip in a skateboard the same as a backflip in a snowboard? Like they're both boards, different surfaces, different techniques, completely different sports. They're not the same thing. They might look the same, but they're not. And it was obviously a constant fight with these people to get them to realize that they cannot box parkour in gymnastics, because that's what has happened. They wanted to box parkour in gymnastics, which is a little bit uh not great, because in the end I see a vision where everything that we've worked for in parkour, if it goes ahead and we get to the Olympics, we will 100% have a situation as it was in Australia with the breakdancing, where it was laughable, it was not a great representation of our sport, and it impacted the whole sport in a global scale. I ask people nowadays, see a freestyle fig competition, even the best athlete, let's say Ellis, Watch that. And then watch a Joe Scandron, a Dom, or any other athlete, a Kaylin Chan outside doing big things. And ask the public which one is more attractive, which one is parkour, and which one is gymnastics, and they'll completely separate both of them. You cannot cheat the public, because this is the whole point of the Olympics, is a platform to portray our sport. It's for the people, and the people will accept it, and then the people will actually support the sport, and then we'll get the support needed to fund the sponsorships, fund the athletes, fund the coaches, the gyms, etc., etc. But it has to be supported by the public, and they have to like it. However, Fig already, I saw this in 2018, 19, 2018, 19. They already shot themselves in the foot. They cannot go beyond what they've already put. They're only bandaging a system that was already failing from the beginning. And that is unfortunate. However, there's other ways to go around it that I'll talk about in another session. But the thing is, they cannot build obstacles higher than 2 meters. They have to build obstacles that mirror each other. They have to make the obstacle course a certain amount of length. And it's just a standard. And it's just a standard that boxes them, like I said, into this gymnastics formats. Um, so they already lost the game in the long run. Then that is like in the format and in the rules section, it's the same thing. Like in the end, I predicted not too long ago in like the online Chinese national competition, I literally, like hours before the last submission and everything, I said like, whoever does 2 or 3 tricks with a double flyaway or double flyaway full in the comp is going to win, and doesn't matter who it is. And they don't have to do they don't have to do any vaults. They just can connect one double fly to another double fly full, another one, and they will win. And guess what happened? That's exactly what happened. The kid that won that was exactly the kid that did the move that I was saying. And I was like, yeah, great. Like that proves my point. It's flawed. If you want to win a parkour competition, you need to do these tricks. I'm sorry, but there's no parkour in that. That's gymnastics and hard floor. I applaud that. Congratulations to the gymnastics, to the gymnasts. But there's no parkour, and I think that is the important thing here to always keep an eye on, is that yes, parkour is under this whole situation with Fig, but in reality, they're not portraying parkour. The closest thing they have with parkour is the speed courses, and even the speed courses suck, because we already know that our higher level parkour courses and speed courses, that even the audience knows about it. So you cannot cheat the public, you cannot cheat the sport. You can just go so far pretending that what they're doing is parkour. And I think that the only thing that is holding them together is the support of the athletes that are there. But that's the big problem, is that the sport parkour for the longest time has always had a huge vacuum on how to support professional athletes, right? That's the whole reason, if we go back in history, that's the whole reason the parkour competition started in Barclay Card in England. It's because they needed to make an event that was amazing and shocking and surprising for the audience. And they decided, back then easy, decided that a parkour competition, the first parkour competition, would be something that people would like cheer on, right? And that's how it started, as an excuse to be able to sell our sport to people. Now, obviously, years have passed, and now we actually have people that their whole goal is to compete in parkour, right? And that is completely valid. That is now part of our sport. But are we going to let organization to dilute our sport or lower the quality of what we've already built throughout years and decades of experience through the community and through trial and error? There's a reason why we have speed, freestyle, and skills as our main core concepts in competitions, right? The fact that they're missing skills, it just leans more into the fact that they do not understand parkour. They do not understand parkour at all, right? So I think it's great, like the vision that we have right now and where we want to push it, but it's really important to understand what's going on behind the scenes with these people. Unfortunately, as Kozy mentioned it before, their representative is a trampolinist. Well, the same thing happened with the other judges when I was in there. They were judges from, one was from trampoline, the other one was from gymnast, and the other one was a parkour coach, and he was just starting. But I remember the first competition after the first meeting we did with the code of points. We went to, it was Hungary and or Japan. And this is just like my personal experience, and it's gonna be a little bit shocking for the world to listen, but um I was judging the competition, and I was scoring them. Okay, that's a 7, that's an 8, that's a 7, blah blah, right? And then my judges next to me come up to me. It's like, oh, what do you score them? I don't know what to score them. I was like, oh, this is, well, for this move, I scored him like a 8, could be like, or 7, depending on what you decide, but it's up to you. And so he's like, I wrote 3. I was like, okay, what did you wrote? I wrote 0, and not even kidding. I'm not even kidding. I'm not even exaggerating. And that's when it hit me. I was like, we're letting these people manage the future of these athletes. It's not about us. It's not about the judges getting our trips paid and traveling around the world. That was never my focus. But for a lot of people in those organizations, that's their focus, right? Therefore, if they're not prepared, as long as they say yes to everything that Fig says, and they don't cause a problem, and they don't confront people, they will keep getting invited. They're the yes men. They'll probably get better with their practice, right? But that's the kind of people they chose to start with, right? Nowadays, it's pretty much a dead end. The scoring system will stay the same. They won't change it. You will still see whoever does the most double flyaways to full ins or triple flyaways win the frig fun competition as long as they land it properly. And that's it. And that's it, right? And that's the only thing that will continue to prevail in their freestyle. And speed, not much. They're just going to keep adding more time and more length and more whatever it is. And the all around that Kozy was mentioning, they've been actively pursuing athletes that can do both, so they can do an all around competition since 2018, 2019. At some point, some federations were actually telling the athletes that if they didn't do all rounders, they'd be kicked out from the national team. So a lot of athletes had a lot of pressure to perform, and of course, the organization of the event has always been terrible. That's no surprise. I actually even do memes on my Instagram about it. I told for the longest time, this I'll die in this hill. I told Charles, hey Charles, it'd be a great idea that if we do competitions on rain season, we can like rent a tarp. $3,000 for 3 days of the event. No, we don't have a budget. Perfect. Okay, don't listen to me. There's been like probably 2 or 3 world championships that have been canceled because of rain. So in the end, I know that it's not Charles's fault completely. It has to do with a lot of moving pieces with the people from gymnastics that they don't want to allow parkour to expand. They just want to keep it there with a little reservoir of money to keep it floating and just milk it. Basically milk it with the least amount of investment as possible. And that's why you have for example, Team USA, right? Where you have, and I don't want to put my friend in the spot, but you have George Monroe, which is one of my friends, one of my friends in Mexico, and one of my team members in World Chase Tag, where he saw the opportunity. He was like, "Oh, well, no one's applying for this. I'm gonna apply and I'm gonna compete for the USA because my goal is to be a professional athlete." And you can't blame people like that because they want the opportunity, right? However, it's obviously a double-edged sword. And then that's when we have this whole situation where they're starting to get athletes from other competitions into the team, and then they get used, basically. They just get used. With the problem is that they will be representing the USA or any country for that matter. Um, but without a budget, without like any real reward. And they're just pawns on a bigger game. I mean, that's unfortunately that's what it is. And we've seen it like now with the SPL, where like a lot of athletes decide to not go to SPL because they have to go to FIG, and if they don't go, they'll lose their spot that they've been working for the last 2 or 3 years, right? And it waits on them, right? But there's no alternatives, and that's the problem, is that we don't have a solid alternative yet that will actually rivalry big competitions. Because unfortunately, if you win, you actually can win decent prize money, but you're competing against 50 people. Not everyone gets that amount, right? And
Hey, hey,
it's
Danny, we may need to wrap this portion up in about a minute. So, do you have any closing statements, I would say, at this point?
yeah. Yeah, so to summarize all, I think it's an effort for everyone. And I think we all have to come together with a vision and support that vision. Because we've already tried to milk a fig and it's not working. It's not working. We cannot change their ways. And even if we change their ways, we won't ever get the parkour competition that we deserve in the Olympics, because they already capped everything. They already shot themselves in the foot. We cannot build bigger obstacles. We cannot build better speed courses. We cannot build actual sustainability in the sport within FIG. So I invite everyone to support your federation in your country. And if you don't have a federation in your country, start one. Start one now, because otherwise this will keep going. This is gonna keep happening, and we'll lose grip on it. But I believe that we can change this around 100% with the right people and the right mentality, and also with the right sponsorships and the right support, because that way we can actually tell athletes that, hey, we can actually pay you, we can actually get you sponsorship, we can actually support your career, and you don't need to go to FIG if that's the matter. You don't actually, if we ended up in the Olympics, you don't have to go to Olympics anymore. We can probably pay you more, right? That's the goal. So that's why, like, I'm really thankful for the invitation to be like the brand manager here, and help obviously USPK reach a full potential for the competitions and create a better platform for our athletes. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And thank you so much for listening to my rant.
Yeah. Well done, Danny. That was a master class in kind of your experience talking about everything, summarizing it. So thank you so much for your time. And yeah, we're super excited to have you on as brand manager. You can tell that Danny is fired up about this stuff, and that's what we love at USPK. We're trying to get folks in that are fired up and want to push the change, and volunteer their time like that. So thank you so much, Danny. Um, as far as next steps, when we talk about what USBK's next steps are, there's a variety of options, and these are things that we definitely want people to ask us more questions about and just kind of weigh in. You know, officially, we could lodge a complaint with the USOPC. There are methodology to do that, I would say. It's kind of one of those things. I don't necessarily know that we have a lot to lose at this point, because if they deny us, we'll talk about that publicly, and specifically the reasons that they did deny us. But I think, specifically looking through some of their own statutes to see whether USAG is actually in compliance with some of the own statutes that USOPC requires, is a good starting point. There's the potential for arbitration, whether that's actual like a legal battle or just like non-legal arbitration. There's options there. Those are some things we could consider. if we decide to not work with gymnastics. The other thing is that like we do have a plethora of like other options. I would say that like the one that has voiced interest is obstacle course racing. They voiced interest, I want to say, in 2017 when they started talking to WFPF a little bit about that. I've talked with Ian Adamson, who runs World OCR at this point, and he's aware of us. He's very much like looking at USPK and saying like, "Hey, you guys are an NGB. You guys are a nonprofit. You are doing all of the right things by creating um, a national circuit, and having your financials be transparent, having your minutes be transparent, etc. Those are all the things that you need to do to become an actual like USOPC recognized NGB. So you guys are on a good path. One of the things that OCR is interested in is Ninja Warrior has already become a subdiscipline of obstacle course racing, and potentially will even be like a small debut at the 2028 Olympics. That's kind of still undecided whether that's going to happen or not. But what Ian and many others who run OCR have noticed is that the people who do the best at Ninja Warrior tend to come from a parkour and climbing background. And that Ninja Warrior, for all the popularity and how many ninja gyms have popped up, a lot of those ninja gyms are not teaching great parkour basics, and kind of slap the label of parkour on their instruction without really teaching the basics of movement. And it's telling that the people who run OCR have kind of noticed that and have started to realize that like, hey, the Philippines seems to really be winning a lot of these like OCR ninja competitions. Why is that? Oh, wait, they're taking all of the people from their parkour community and putting them into Ninja Warrior competitions. They have great movement fundamentals, and even if the course is very different from what they've done with parkour people are extremely adaptable. And once you have those basic movements, you can apply it to a bunch of different courses. Um, so yeah, there is the potential to try and seek a different. Did I freeze here?
We can still hear you.
Am I back? Okay, great. um, one of the potentials is to seek a different international federation to go through. So that's a potential consideration. We've kept the door open and that red foam of diplomacy open with OCR as well. But that's something we want community feedback on before, continuing in either of these directions, essentially. Ideally, I think the perfect scenario, of course, is being completely independent, like USA Climbing. Um, that's what we would love. But there's no immediate pathway to the Olympics because of the dissolution of GISIF, and kind of those entry level ones. So I think we'd love that, but right now it doesn't seem to be realistic. We can obviously try and go down the path of becoming a recognized USOPC NGB. There's a lot of steps, guidelines in the Ted Stevens Act and the Amateur Sports Act, mean that you're like I think our competition rulebook right now for speed skill style is around like 50 pages. Um, if you look at something like swimming or gymnastics rulebook, to be compliant with those acts, it's about 850 pages. So you get really, really technical very quickly, which can stifle the growth of a new sport. We at USPK admit that like we don't have all the answers. We don't have all of this figured out. We speed skill style is great, but we want to continue to encourage gyms and competitions to experiment with different formats because there's probably a lot more out there. I've really enjoyed seeing Chase Tag, and I've been involved with Chase Tag about as long as I have with USPK. And although it's not, they're very clear to say that they're not parkour. They've certainly benefited from parkour, and there's so much overlap that within that community, that is really cool to see a sport kind of take off. That again, all what's the all tides rising ships. I'm messing up that
Rising
that phrase
tides raise all
completely.
ships.
Thank you, Mel. Total brain fart on that. But my point is with that is like if say LA 2028 came to us and said, do you want a parkour demo in the 2028 Olympics? I think the smart answer would be exactly what Danny said, which is like, hell no, we're not ready for that. And we'll have a breakdancing moment where everyone says, what the hell is this? Versus, you have some already packaged TV formats that, while isn't the best representation of parkour, like Ninja Warrior and Chase Tag, those are packaged, and you need parkour to be good at those sports. So if one of those makes it to the Olympics, and all of a sudden you start seeing people do parkour movements on that Olympic stage, I think it's one of those things where you're just looking at that and going like, yeah, like that's going to help parkour out overall. Again, we're just going to focus, like our main focus is to just continue growing parkour, continue doing our thing. Um, we're going to continue trying to join as many sports industry orgs as possible, and develop broadcast and sponsor relations so we can hopefully bring more money into the sport organically. Promote parkour culture, uplift the folks in the community that are doing good. I think it'd be great to get a parkour documentary out in the world, and seeing store premiere, I think about a week and a half ago at South by Southwest, with the Michael Bay film is a step in that direction. And of course, we want to unite all of these separate efforts. Can we go back to the last slide just real quick, Corey, and then we'll jump into FAQ. So I've outlined some of the pros here. These pros, like, I know that we've talked, and some people have probably brought up that it sounds extremely negative. Like, I've tried to present, again, as many of these things as facts. It's tinged, of course, with my own personal bias because I've been doing this research for 5 years at this point. The pros are significant, right? Legitimacy and funding, those first two, that's insane. That's what parkour has wanted. It's basically its entire lifespan, which is just like the ability for the rest of the world to recognize what we're doing and say, that's awesome. That's parkour. I know what parkour is, and it feels like our culture. And the ability to support yourself as an athlete and be able to train the sport and get paid for it. Broadcasting, expectations of kind of what's required out of an NGB, interest from outside sponsors. Those are all like really big things, as well as I would say the national pride of competing with Team USA is a big motivator for a lot of people. So those pros are massive, I would say. We've maybe talked a lot of negative stuff about the Olympics, but those are massive. Those aren't to be understated, right? The cons right now, like I think the first one is so key, which is just like, if it's only through FIG and we lose our soul as a sport along the way, and we have very little input or leverage to be able to push back against gymnastics because they hold all of the funding or all of the power. Is it worth it? Is it still parkour if we get to that point? The Olympics comes with all of the bureaucracy and red tape that I mentioned before, and all of that flexibility can really stifle, all of that inflexibility can stifle the growth of like young sports. As Danny and I think Mel mentioned before, to change the rule set happens basically every 4 years. So if a competition happens and we don't like it, it's not that it gets changed next year like we can do with USPK. It takes another 4-year cycle to do that. And you can pretty much only go through one athlete, who I think right now is Kaylin Chan. And even after Kaylin, there's about 7 other layers. And this is me talking to Kaylin directly about this. This isn't just like hearing it secondhand, asking about, what does the chain of command look like? And there's about, 6 to 7 other people above Kaylin who help make those decisions about rule changes. So basically, if you want a rule change right now to a competition, you have to go talk to Kaylin. Kaylin has to bring it before his superiors and kind of like work it up the chain. And that's still maybe going to happen in 4 years rather than immediately. So we're still a young, nimble sport. Adaptability is in pretty much our blood. So it's one of those things where, yeah, it doesn't change very quickly with something like the Olympics. And of course, we're super worried about misrepresentation, having that breakdancing moment. The rest of the world thinking that parkour gymnastics is parkour, the parkour that we grew up training and knowing. And the fact that there's many alternative options. The Olympics is not the only game in town. Skateboarding started with the X Games. That's something that we've thought about trying to pursue, is partnering with other action sports, pursuing a hybrid model. Wouldn't we love to see a complete kind of, human body type of competition where we partner with climbing, we partner with martial arts, we partner with some of these other sports that are just kind of like, it feels like basic human movement, and cross training a bunch of those different things. You've already started to see this happen, right? Some of the folks in the UFC, like Conor McGregor, cross training some parkour stuff. We've talked to USA Soccer about wanting to come and us to teach basically like a workshop on falling in ukemi, because they have plenty of falls in soccer, and it's always really cool to see when people actually know how to break fall and say they get slid tackled and roll and pop back up and are out of it and back on the field sooner. So there's plenty of opportunities for other hybrid areas where we can work with other existing sports orgs to try and create something of our own. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time. I apologize we're over, but let's move on to the FAQ portion.
All right. Okay, so feel free to either drop your questions in the chat or raise your digital hand. I know the first question we got was from Nick, so I will take people off mute when your question comes up. If you want to speak, you're welcome to. If you're like, I already dropped my question in the chat, that's also fine too. But Nick, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to unmute if you are comfortable with that.
Hey, yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Awesome.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So I think you guys actually kind of touched on some of the first questions that I had there, and I appreciate Kozy at the end there kind of circling back around to answer why those, because I was kind of wondering why those negatives so much on the Olympics. Anyways, the main question that I have is lower down in the chat there, and what I'm wondering is, how can USPK better partner with local regions to encourage competition growth all around? And how can we grow not just the national circuit, but also the local gyms and regions without, suffocating them? So I think that'd be the main question that I have. So I don't want to talk too much about the experiences there. It's in the chat. People can take a look at it. But some of your guys' roadmap or game plan is long term for that? Or is it more like, let's just focus on the national circuit and let's just try to grow that as big as we can, because you kind of need that funding or that to be of an immense size to kind of move forward with some of the projects that you guys are talking about, is what it seems like.
Do you want me to go first, Corey?
Yeah, feel free to, unless you want me to jump in first.
Okay. I have a couple thoughts starting off, and I know that there was definitely a change from what was discussed. I actually didn't know about the original agreement that was, we'll just have the local regions running their circuits and just sending people to nationals. When I was brought in, I definitely started building our national circuit from the model that the other national governing bodies are running from, where they've got the volunteers that are running things. We're still largely an all volunteer run organization. We are bringing on a couple of staff members soon to help with the growth, to help with marketing and with what's the other one, Corey? Membership. And so working this model whereby we could let the gyms run the competitions and then funnel the information up through regional coordinators to a national championship. It's definitely the model we've been working for. I'm happy that we are at the 6 full regions this year. I'm definitely sad that there were some hard feelings coming out of last year from the 2 private groups. It wasn't intended to be that way. I had definitely thought I was trying to communicate, but obviously didn't do a good enough job about the direction we were heading in terms of trying to meet this in the more nonprofit and volunteer way. We definitely want to be working with parkour gyms, companies, organizations to help build them up. We want to help gyms build up membership through building up teams, building up events, building up activities. Right now, part of the problem is manpower. Running just this as a volunteer group. I know that Corey and I and Melissa Way, who's not on the call today, are putting in, loads and loads of hours every week. But and thankfully we're growing. We're adding board members to help out. and going in that direction. But it was really the choice to try to create a nationalized system where it was consistent across the nation, and you could expect the same thing going from one region to the next, the same formatting, the same rules. I can't imagine showing up to a soccer game and not knowing that there were going to be the set rules, even though we moved to a different town. So I think maybe that gets to some of your questions. I think Corey was going to maybe weigh in with something else or not. If
I also have something. It depends. Corey, go first if you
okay,
want.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is on the one hand, I mean, like being able to actually ensure that there's oversight and memberships are being, you know, correctly purchased is unfortunately like just a reality of it in terms of just, and it also ensuring that policies are accurate across the nation, and these are policies such as, you know, child sexual assault prevention. These are policies such as a trans inclusion policy. Different competition circuits, we are very encouraging of athletes choosing the competition, that circuit that works for them, both format wise and also policy wise as well too, as people have different values across the nation as well. And a big thing that we're trying to do is to build, you know, we talked about the membership is what shows that we have the numbers when we are looking at a comparison against, you know, USA Gymnastics or FIG. On top of that, you know, we do want to support, you know, we do want to support that there are other competition circuits out there. The rub often happens that there are both youth competition circuits, and those happen during school, you know, school year times, right? So that is a hard thing to reconcile. But at the same time, you know, as our mission is to advance the parkour industry, that's also why we're doing things like trying to get both in-person and online business conferences. We've had a lot of internal conversations about the value of encouraging gyms and trying to provide some educational resources around getting gyms to have like parkour teams, for instance, encouraging those parkour teams to go to multiple competition circuits, right? I mean, that is a big value for a parkour gym to, you know, essentially have something that helps build retention with their advanced athletes, gives their beginner, you know, students something to look up to as well. So yeah, we're always very open to hearing feedback on how we can better support the US community and find ways to, you know, coexist, because yeah, there are many competition circuits, there are many different parkour formats, and we want to support all of them to the best of our ability.
I really appreciate your response. That was really well said. And I like what you said at the end there. I think that's like, I would love to explore maybe another way where there could be partnerships without necessarily having to funnel athletes into the national circuit. Like, what other ways
Sure.
could the regional circuits partner with the national circuits? And I just got to say, I really appreciate you guys being so open. And it really shows that you want the parkour community to vet you. You want them to put you through that, to ask those questions, so you guys have that opportunity to come out and say to everybody, like, this is what we're about. So I'm really impressed with your responses to the questions. And I know Kozy had one thing that he wanted to say. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, that's all good. No, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. And that's absolutely right. We do want the community to vet us. We are not going to shy away from hard questions. We are going to apologize when it's due, and I do think an apology is due to some of the private leagues that we worked with, just because I think I was there for this original piece of it, which the original vision was to just take the existing leagues and kind of put everyone together. We certainly didn't have the funding or the manpower to start a league completely from scratch on our own. So the original vision was, hey, there's a bunch of regional leagues that exist. Let's try and get everyone on the same page and start talking about how we can create a national circuit, how everyone can kind of be represented. And I think for the first year, that was exactly what we did. Mel came in, did a great job of you know, establishing regional coordinators, establishing lines of contact, making sure that yes, we didn't have all the regions immediately represented, but just like doing our best to kind of get this up and running. And then, part of it is like the reality hits is that when each league is private and all of them have either different age brackets or different rules, etc., there's very little kind of like pushback, I would say, or we can't really dictate necessarily like, hey, this needs to be this way because like we need a uniform standard across this. And that's kind of what it felt like, was that we were trying to say, hey, we need this to be even, because if somebody comes in on the West Coast and competes under these circumstances, and somebody comes in with completely different circumstances on the East Coast, is it fair when the one has like a leg up over the other? And that's kind of the whole thing that governing bodies and NGBs do, is they do tend to govern the competition space. That's kind of why we had this debate when I first came in, which was just like, is parkour competitive? And 50% of the board said, like, no, it's not. Like, we were very split on the fact that it's not competitive, but we looked at what do national governing bodies do? They govern the competition space in sports. And so Mel came in with obviously a ton of experience from USA Climbing, being a regional coordinator for an USOPC NGB that went to the Olympics during her tenure there. So she was like, there's specifically some things that we have to change and really like standardize about this. And I think how we tried to put as many communicatory emails out ahead of time, warning people of some of the changes, telling people that like, hey, we're requiring these memberships because like we need the funding to keep this going. I'll fully disclose that like the first year, a good portion of the prize money was donated by me, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to put my money where my mouth is when it comes to parkour. Not everyone in the sport is able to do that. Thank you, day job, for making that happen. But like and the next year, Kiskea stepped in a big way to help that prize funding. Like, we are super grateful for the people that donate and give their time, but memberships is just kind of like the only way, other than donations, that we keep the lights on and we're able to pay people for their time. And even then, our board does not get paid for its time. That's the whole point. So the yeah, I apologize that sometimes it seems like maybe this kind of came through and seemed dictatorial, but we really looked for as many options to kind of like change things slowly and bring people along for the ride. But I hear you, and I do think that we can do a much better job of highlighting the other competitions that are out there, without necessarily having them funnel in, because we do want to promote that diversity in competition. We do want to promote, like I said, those different formats. Like, get weird with it. I still really want to see speed relays. I will not shut up about that. I want to see specialists, like where you have like a Daryl doing like a sense for like one portion of the course. Like, oh man, I want to see that shit so bad. So anyways, that's it.
All right,
Oh, I'm so sorry. I really appreciate what you said, Kozy. You're turning me into a super fan. I really appreciate the apology, and like, um, I, I, I appreciate that you're able to say like, hey, we're doing our best with what we have. We're going to continue to do better in the future, and like, this is the direction that we're heading in. This is what we had to do. I am super grateful, and just so everybody knows, I'm one of the I'm the owner and operator of the Southeast Parkour Championships, and I worked with USPK for 2 years. And for you to come out and kind of acknowledge some of the issues and some of the pros and cons that were experienced throughout that relationship, that was amazing. I never actually had the opportunity to really talk with anyone to really get to meet you guys. I did go out to the national competition, but it seemed like it was very busy the past couple of years. But so it was nice to kind of get to talk with you and meet you a little bit more officially, and I look forward to kind of maybe even working with you guys more in the future. But thank you so much for
Our,
everything you said. I really appreciate that.
our DMs are open always. You can find us, like, I think our social media is on the website, but feel free to hit us up anytime. And yeah, come say hi at the next competition we're at. Just like come up and introduce yourself. We always have time for folks.
I just want to throw in real fast. I really appreciated what you said, Nick. That, I mean, you guys are our community. Like, it's crazy to me how much parkour is a part of my life at this point at 50. I never would have guessed I'd get there, but you guys are the people that I spend my time with, my free time, my now work time, although it's volunteer work. And I deeply care what everybody thinks. I truly view this as having however many hundreds of kids I have. And so we do care. We are a part of the community. now I'll shut up so we have time for more questions from Garrett.
We got two other questions. We have Intent had a question in Q&A, and then I also saw a question from Charles. And I know Garrett, you got a question too. If you want to, we can do your third. Actually, so let's go Intent. All right, Intent, you should be able to unmute yourself. And I can go ahead and read the question at the same time. In regards to the youth nationals at Woodward, for the athletes that qualify for that, are they still having to pay for a weekend at Woodward? Is there an actual national champion competition there? And how would that work for their coaches that would want to support them?
Great question. So to start the first question, they do have to pay. We get a discount, and I apologize, I don't remember the discount off the top of my head. As I looked at it, so we definitely don't have, we looked at, can we throw the youth national championships the same time as the adult national championships? And the reality is no. Those can't be done at the same time, given our current formatting. We are completely doing work for the entire 4 days that we're there already, and there isn't more time to have a second competition. So once we started looking at the fact that youth nationals would have to be a separate week, we opened up what the ideas would be. Does that mean we ask a gym to close down another week? And what is really our goal for the youth? And the goal for the youth right now is to bring them together and create the connections through the youth and the adults in the community. And so through that, we are partnering with Woodward. There will be competition during the week, but there will not be one official national championship. It is more an opportunity to come together and practice and learn together and practice the competitions. We will absolutely be looking for feedback after this first year. And any coaches that are interested in going, the best bet is to connect with me, and we'll see if we can get people there. We have a certain number of people we're going to be able to bring in. Our first goal is to try to bring in some of our adult national champions so that the kids can work with them, but the coaches would be amazing too. I think I maybe got to.
All right, perfect.
Okay. Sorry if I forgot any of your other questions there.
I think you got it. And I'm just going to speed through these. So Charles, I'm going to ask you you're welcome to unmute if you would like to. And Charles's question is, why haven't we pursued X Games or other things like that?
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, like, why has it always been such a focus on the Olympics, especially when like skateboarding, which is one of our more analogous disciplines, like was able to do that through other means, like by the X Games. I know 90s X Games were a bigger deal than the current iteration of X Games are, but at the same time, the entity is still going, and the connections and everything that they have, if nothing else, have just gotten stronger over those years.
I'd start by saying they had the luxury of time. Climbing and skateboarding had decades to build up their competitions on their own and create it and make it what they wanted to. And with the IOC putting us under the FIG banner, it sort of took away that freedom of time to develop ourselves outside of that spotlight. And then I'm guessing that maybe Kozy has something to add to that, or
Yeah, Danny may have as well, but yeah, in general, like it's something we've obviously considered. Some of it is contacts, but some of it's also just like you don't want to shoot your shot before you're ready. And there's a lot of that. We've kind of had that same thing with like, are we ready to lodge a formal complaint against USOPC? And when I first started at USPK 5 years ago, we were not, like going. We had under 100 members, I think, at that point. It's very difficult to go to the USOPC and say, hey, we represent parkour. And they're like, well, less than 100 people. See you. We don't care what you say. So we want to be coming from a position of strength and a united position, I think is the biggest thing when we kind of have some of those talks with, USOPC, with X Games. So that's very much on our radar. We're starting to kind of like reach out to folks and figure out what the lay of the land is for that. X Games is also going through some changes as well. If I'm not mistaken, they are moving to a model where they actually are trying to fund like teams because a lot of the funding did run out for athletes unless you had the Monster Energy sponsorship or something like that. Um, it was hard to make a living year round because of when they would do competition seasons and all of these different things. And I think they also kind of realized it was a little bit difficult for viewers to follow along. So I think one of the things that they mentioned they were moving towards is actually having like teams where you basically have two BMX specialists, two skateboarding specialists, different sports. And it would be awesome to get parkour in the mix because like I do think that would be incredible to have a couple athletes on a specific team. It almost reminds me a little bit more of like an esports model where you do have specialists on specific things for your team, but you're all working in conjunction. And esports is another one we'd love to talk to. Vinny Fiacco has come in and given us some great talks. He works in esports and does a lot of like contracts, and I think is now also starting to represent Dom and Tim Champion. So esports is interested and has a lot of crossover with our community. So there's a couple other routes we could go down, but Danny, I don't know if you had anything else to say on that.
1 second, let me unmute Danny, and then we can get to Garrett's question. All right, you should be able to unmute.
There we go. Yeah, so yeah, basically Kozy explained it a lot better, but yeah, we have been thinking about the aim to either do X Games or alternatively create our own format, our own competition, like it is the Street League in skateboarding as well, which is actually even bigger, bigger prize money and bigger focus on the sport than it is in X Games. So there are definitely alternatives. The thing is, we cannot get and knock the door, like Kozy was saying, we cannot shoot our shot until we don't have the right package, we have the right product to sell, and what Kozy was also saying, like the right format, right? Because right now they are going through changes. So we need to be able to adapt to those changes and offer something better, something that actually is refreshing for the audience, that is impactful, that represents our sport, and that actually is sustainable. That's the important thing. We will get there. There's a roadmap for that. I think like we will definitely, like, it's one of my goals and what I've always wanted with parkour is like get it to the X Games or create our own parkour league with a higher viewership, and it will just needs to take we need to take time. We just need to go through the motions, get the right sponsorships, get the right formats, and we'll be there. I am pretty sure. I have connections in the skateboarding world. I know some people. So yeah, we'll make it happen. We'll make some moves.
All right,
One
awesome.
one last
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
last thing that I'll say just before we move on is that like I think Loic might still be in the call, but Loic is working with World Chase Tag, and I think that Chase Tag is like an excellent example of
Yeah.
like they have a finished product. It's so good. It's built for advertisers. You can advertise on the quad. There's space on like where you see the little ESPN notes and everything like that. So like they have a purpose built product to sell, and they've still been struggling to find funding. It's not hey Loic, I see you in the chat. Yeah, and it's not that it's not marketable. It's certainly not that. I think it's just been like there's several factors that contribute to that. It's obviously something that's just kind of in this like weird middle phase where you have a bunch of really rich investors, say some Saudis who want to buy a football club, that are looking to pump in almost $1 billion or several hundred million. And the amounts that kind of parkour and chase tag and a bunch of these other sports that are up and coming need are a little bit smaller. And so sometimes investors are kind of looking at like, well, how much do I put in? What's the return rate? All of those different things. So they're having a lot of those chats, but I would just say that like Chase Tag is a great example of like they have much more of a finished product than parkour does right now. And it's still difficult. Like the marketing world has changed because of social media. the sponsorship world has changed a ton because of things like safe sport, things like athletes, getting a $3 million contract and then saying something that gets them canceled the next week. Suddenly the companies are left holding the bag. So as the rise of social media and kind of micro influencers has come along, that's also changed how larger companies start to sponsor sports orgs. So all of that has kind of come at the exact same time. And I would just say like that's part of the difficulty is that like we're having to play a completely new game than even like 10 years ago. So that's part of the challenge with that as well. And X Games is no exception.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna get to Garrett's question, and then I saw that looks like Dean's question was answered in the chat. So we're gonna do Delania. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Delana, thank you. And then we're going to wrap up with Jess's questions, which is about how can we have further questions. So, and conversation about this. Garrett did have to hop, but his question was, can you please share the timing of focusing back in on the decision about the Olympics? Are there upcoming deadlines you see? If USAG and FIG continue hostile takeover, at what point would board members be willing to accept less power for independent parkour governance and try to collaborate with USAG?
Great question, Garrett. And I'll high five him later when I see him online. Yeah, I think the impetus right now is the fact that it's more of our own impetus, which is basically just that like we've been at this for like years at this point, and we haven't really caught the community up to where things are at. I think it's really easy for us because we're all volunteers and we're all like time poor, to just like keep our heads down and like focus on like grow the sport, do this thing, move to the next thing. And it's important to like zoom back out and share our findings. And we hadn't really done that for a while. And I think that like that was one of the main impetuses for the formation of USPK was like, hey, it was essentially a bunch of different orgs, Mark from APK, Frosty from Tempest, Amos and Ryan from Apex, and Caitlin from Parkour Visions, a bunch of these larger orgs all putting aside potential competition, and competing interests to basically say, listen, like we want to protect this sport. This is where we need to set something up to kind of try and be the adults in the room for the rest of the sporting industry, which is like extremely cutthroat and political, like we said. So it's not always the sexiest work. We'll say that it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of grinding, but it's one of those things where we do need to share what we've found. And I think we've found quite a bit, which shows how the sausage is made. And I think that like, again, education is one of our pillars at USPK. So making sure that people understand, like, this is how the Olympics works. This is how funding works. This is what these athletes are getting paid. And that like, yeah, the Olympics holds a lot of promise and that legitimacy and that funding that we really want. But there's a lot of drawbacks, as we mentioned throughout this talk. So that was kind of part of it, was like we want to discuss that stuff. As far as would we be willing to accept less power, for independent parkour governance and collaborating with USAG, like I think we opened the door for that, which was like we established the line of communication. We specifically said, what actually I think one of the models that BMX does is that basically like BMX is under UCI, cycling, basically the cycling federation, the international federation, much older, has existed for 100+ years, a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of waspy type of folks running the org and stuff like that. BMX is much newer action sport, founded like in the US and like really grew as a big part of like the US culture around it, and then grew globally from there. BMX basically like told cycling at one point to basically kind of like stay in your own bike lane, basically. like we've got this. You know what, like you fund the Olympic route. We will send you 12 athletes every single year, that come from our community, that have come up through our competitions, that don't necessarily have anything to do with what you're doing at the Olympic level. So, like that was an option that we were like, would we consider that? Yeah, potentially. And so we kind of even made that pitch to them, and they didn't take us up on it. So it's like, all right, well, like you guys clearly don't want to work together. at all, because we're even offering to take the grunt work and the effort of kind of determining those athletes, creating a full national circuit to do all of those things, and you still don't want it, but they'll kind of complain about how basically like, we don't really want to deal with parkour right now, and FIG is kind of forcing us to. That's definitely some of the tone that we've gotten from the meetings. It's like, we don't really pay attention to this stuff until FIG comes around and says, hey, we need athletes. So I think that's kind of the big thing, is like we've opened that door. We've kind of said like, here's a potential thing that could work. What do you think of this? And haven't really gotten a good response. So I think that's indicative of us still focusing largely on kind of our own thing at this point. Anyone else have anything to add?
I would say that, yeah, I totally agree. I think we would be very open to having a conversation based around us having legitimate control over the direction of the competition and what that looks like. BMX is a great example. The other one that people often talk about is snowboarding, going under skiing. And I think there are ways that it can be done that honor the sport and allow it to have its own, to develop on its own while still being a part of another group.
All right. Okay, thank you. The second to last question from Delana, and I will ask you to go off mute if you would like to. Delana's question was, what could be the process to get out from under FIG with that formal complaint? Is that something being voted on or that USPK is planning on?
Sure. So that's actually like our very recent conversation. We do have Mike, who's one of our legal counsels, and yeah, we've kind of said like, let's at least go through and kind of see what a complaint process looks like. Do we have any grounds for that to stand on? There is a clause that basically says that like, if an NGB is found to be not fulfilling their duties under the Amateur Sports Act, so that they can actually be removed and decertified for a particular sport, and another org can actually replace them. So that's a possibility, and that's kind of a more recent discovery while like combing through a lot of their own documents and their own charters. So it's something that we can definitely explore. I think that's actually a fine thing to vote on. I don't know how the other folks feel, but it's definitely one of those things where, yeah, we like, consent would be great to go ahead and do something like that, because in general we still get the sense from a lot of the community that it's like, we don't necessarily like, if there's a way to get out from under USAG and FIG, then it seems like a lot of parkour people would like that.
And then just a quick addendum to that question from Max Henry. I don't know, do we have any updates from the legal complaints Parkour Earth filed back in 2017, 2018?
I don't know anything, but again, I'm very new to the board and have just been on the competition side.
We will find out. We don't
The,
might not
the
know right
last
now.
the last I talked to Damien when he was still leading some of those efforts, it's been a couple years, was that they were trying more of a legal arbitration route. There's an arbitration court for sports. And basically the argument was predicated on the fact that like FIG had violated its own charters, and specifically the IOC's charters. And I think a large portion of part of the reason Damien was really leading that charge was his own doctoral research focused on the colonization of action sports, and then showing over time how surfing and skateboarding and BMX had all gone through these kind of like really extensive growing pains to try and become an Olympic sport. There was a lot of cannibalism of like different, skating or BMX orgs eating each other and trying to kind of do that. Like this happens in other sports. Like the fact that like there's us, there's like USAP, there's there's the IPF and stuff like that. All of those things being different and sort of like competing interests within the sport is pretty normal. I would say like that is actually relatively normal from other action sports. But what their argument predicated on was basically the idea that like the IOC commissioned studies in 2014 of how to bring action sports into the Olympics. And Belinda Wheaton, I believe, is one of the people that's regularly cited who sat on the IOC and has a doctorate. And, you know, they went out and did scientific studies of like, how should we do this? And they reported back to the IOC that like, well, involving those local communities of those sports and mentoring them was the best way to do it. And that basically arguing that like gymnastics did the opposite of that and therefore like violated the recommendations of the IOC on how to bring in action sports and convince more younger viewers to tune in, that this was counterproductive to what they were doing and that they were watering down the sports that they were trying to bring in, all in pursuit of dollar signs essentially. So that was the argument. I don't necessarily know if that's been like picked back up or if it was completely abandoned, but that's just some background context, I think, for the folks listening in.
All right, and we're going to wrap up on Jess's question, which quick shout out to Jess. She's been the person managing the social media and our communications for this past year. One of the things that we do recognize that we are working on improving is to get what we're doing out more often. And that is, again, just talking about membership numbers, not to harp on that too much, but I mean, we literally in the bank have had around 10K in the bank for these past years. So, I mean, it's been we're really working on growing. We're really excited about the growth that we're seeing this year. And it's only because we want to be able to have, you know, eventually full-time staff that this is their job, is to get communications out, provide hear feedback and have that better transparency. We're always working on improving that. So that's my soapbox about that. Please support us if you can. And Jess's question was, do you think it'd be beneficial for us to create a dedicated space to have ongoing discussions about this topic? Absolutely. Maybe in the Discord. I think that's a great idea. I will see if I can get that potentially included in the email communication that goes out about voting as well. So yeah, thank you, everybody. We are going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for being here for on over 2 hours of this conversation. The recording will be up live on YouTube. We'll try to send that out in our email newsletter and on our social media too in this coming week. So thanks everyone again. Have a wonderful weekend, whatever you're up to. And you know where to reach us. Instagram, email, you can DM us. All right. Bye, y'all.